It gives me great pleasure to be amongst the leading archaeologists, historians, and scholars of ancient Indian civilization and culture today evening at my official residence. I need not dwell upon importance of archaeology in deciphering the past in terms of history, culture, and the ways living as all of you are experts. I am delighted to release the 3 volumes book felicitating a legendary archaeologist, B.B. Lal. As we get acquainted with Professor Lal's achievements, we also see the depths of our civilization, giving us a feeling of pride in our ancient glory and prosperity.
It was at the launch of a mammoth 3-volume book felicitating a legendary archaeologist, B.B. Lal. The Vice President of India underlined the need to highlight the heritage of ancient Indian civilization and culture. In the same vein, the Vice President also expressed his concern that India's ancient history became a casualty of the colonial rule. In several narratives of history and archaeological findings dating several centuries, the works of Professor B.B. Lal stand amongst the tallest ones. Be it his findings at Kalibangan, the ancient Harappan site in Rajasthan, or findings at Indraprastha throwing light upon Mahabharata. Born on May 2, 1921 in Jhansi, Professor Lal obtained his master's degree in Sanskrit from Allahabad University. Author of more than 150 books and research papers, Professor Lal was awarded the Padma Bhushan by the President of India in the year 2000.
In the 19th century, a German scholar called Max Müller dated the Vedas to 1200 BC on a very ad hoc basis. I need not go into the details how he dated it, but it was a very ad hoc basis. When his contemporary scholars like Wilson, Whitney, Goldstacker objected to this kind of ad hocism, he surrendered. And he said, whether the Vedas were composed in 1000 BC, 2000 BC or 3000 BC, nobody on earth will ever determine. But the great pity is that in spite of such candid surrender by Max Müller himself, his followers in the West and also in India continue to cling to that date 1200 BC. The net result of it was very disastrous. When in the 1920s the Harappan civilization was discovered and dated to the 3rd millennium BC, because Max Müller's fatwa was ruling the day, the civilization was at once said to be pre-Vedic and non-Vedic, because Max Müller's date was 1200 and this was 3rd millennium BC. So the Harappan civilization was at once declared to be non-Vedic.
Serving in Archaeological Survey of India for more than 3 decades, in 1968 he was appointed the Director General of the ASI, the position he served till 1972. Among most of his significant works has been the dating of Vedic corpus. The texts were dated by a German scholar and historian to 1200 BC, but Professor Lal disputes that findings.
This dating of the Vedas by Max Müller, as I said, was on a very ad hoc basis. You see, Sutra literature, which is the end of the Vedic literature, is well known to be about 600 BC. Before that, there are 3 periods of the Vedic literature: the Aranyakas, the Brahmanas, and the Vedas. He gave 200 years to each one of these periods. So 600 plus 200 plus 200 plus 200 Thus he arrived at the figure of 1200. Now this was purely ad hoc basis. To Max Muller must go the credit of bringing the Vedas to the knowledge of the Western world. But this kind of ad hocism was really uncalled for.
By dating the Vedic corpus far earlier, Professor Lal also argued that Indus Valley civilization was inhabited by the peoples who wrote Veda, hence disputing the view that both the civilizations were of separate dates.
Researchers over the 5 decades and excavations have shown that the Harappan civilization and the Vedas are two faces of the same coin. So, the question of Harappan civilization being non-Vedic or the Vedas being after the Harappan civilization does not hold good. Now, the greatest pity is that in spite of such clear researches, even today, some scholars and unfortunately some institutions continue to hold to that old colonial statement.
To firm up his claims, Professor Lal cites the mention of river Saraswati, which finds mention in Vedic corpus several times. The dating of Saraswati, as per Professor Lal, coincides with the era associated with the Indus Valley civilization.
Well, the most important thing is the dating of the Rig Veda, because the whole confusion has arisen out of a wrong dating of the Rig Veda. And in dating the Rig Veda, the Saraswati river, its history plays a very important part. You see, in the Rig Veda, the Saraswati is mentioned as a mighty river flowing from the Himalayas down to the sea. It is mentioned at something like 70 times. It was a mighty flowing river during the Rigvedic period. While we were excavating at Kalibangan in Rajasthan, we wanted to know, the river is now dry. We wanted to know when it dried up. So we did borings in the river bed. And finally we found that the site of Kalibangan had to be deserted because of the drying up of the river. I mean, the water supply was no longer there. C14 method of dating the past has shown that this drying up of the Saraswati took place around 2000 BC. Now here is the most important catch point. The river was flowing in the Harappan, in the Vedic times. It dried up in 2000 BC. What does it mean? It means that the Vedas are earlier than 2000 BC. The minimum you can give is the 3rd millennium BC. Now, the Rigveda gives us some very important information about the area that was occupied by the Vedic people. There is, in the 10th Mandal, there are 2 verses which give the geographical area covered by the Vedic people. And I won't quote the original, but the substance of it is that, you see, it starts with Ime, Gange, Yamune, Saraswati, Shatatri, and so on, right up to the Sindhu. That means the Vedic people were living from the upper reaches of the Ganga, Yamuna, right back to the Indus. Now, if at this point we put a question, which was the archaeological culture that flourished in the 3rd millennium BC in this very area, we find it is none other than the Harappan civilization, which means that the Vedas and the Harappan civilization are two faces of the same coin.
In his findings, Professor Lal also talked about the migration theory, an argument held by historians starting colonial period that there was a migration of Indo-Aryan people from the West. The argument for long has been held indisputable, but Professor Lal claims the migration theory doesn't hold merit.
You see, again, this trouble arises out of the hypothetical dating of the Vedas to 1200 BC, because the Harappan civilization was clearly a product of the 3rd millennium BC. So it was pre-Vedic according to that theory. Now, how did the two interact according to that theory? If the Harappan civilization was 3rd millennium BC and the Vedas were of the 2nd millennium BC, the conclusion was that the Vedic people came from the West and destroyed the Harappan civilization. And the Harappans were taken to be non-Vedic, and there are only two major linguistic groups in India. The other is the Dravidian group. So the conclusion drawn was that the Harappan civilization, being non-Vedic, was that of the Dravidian speaking people. And further a spice was added to the whole story, that the Aryans invaded the Harappan civilization and drew away the Dravidian speaking people to South India. That is where the Dravidian speaking people are at present. Now, if this were true, should you not find some Harappan sites in South India if they were driven? But the fact is that neither in Tamil Nadu, nor in Andhra Pradesh, nor in Karnataka, nor even in Kerala is there even a single Harappan site. So how can you say that the Harappans were driven and they were the Dravidian speaking people?
Another of his prominent works has been the historicity of Mahabharata. Between the year 1950 and 52, he excavated the historical site of legendary city Indraprastha and Hastinapur, the capital city of a Kuru clan.
Well, historicity of the Mahabharata is an interesting issue. This is again a colonial product. According to them, the colonial scholars, neither the Mahabharata nor the Ramayana was historical. Both of them, according to them, were fictitious poems without any basis in history. Well, in 1946, I joined the Archaeological Survey of India and got a tool called archaeology, which actually deals with the material culture of the people. I thought, let me try this new discipline which I had got. And a very important point about the Mahabharata is that all the sites mentioned in the Mahabharata continue to bear the same name even today. For example, Hastinapur, the capital of the Kauravas, is still known as Hastinapur. It is a site on the bank of the Ganga in Meerut district of Uttar Pradesh. Mathura, from where Lord Krishna came, is even today known as Mathura. Kurukshetra, where the battle was fought, is also known as Mathura. I mean, there is no site which is mentioned in the Mahabharata and does not exist today. So my approach was very simple. Let me explore these sites and find out what they contained. And to my great surprise, I found that all the sites in their lowest levels contain a particular kind of culture of which there was a very distinctive pottery which we call the painted greyware. It is a grey pottery in color over which there are paintings in black color, so we call it the painted greyware. There are bowls, dishes, drinking vessels and all that in this sphere. This was the characteristic feature of all the sites. And according to the 14 method of dating, this pottery is datable to 1250 BC to 750 BC. This means that all these sites were in existence during this period and they were interlinked culturally.
In his path-breaking findings, he made discoveries of many painted greyware sites in Indo-Gangetic Divide and Upper Yamuna-Ganga Doab region.
So I decided to undertake excavation of the key site, namely Hastinapur. And it yielded very interesting results, completely surprising. As I said, it is situated on the bank of the Ganga. The mound runs on the right bank of the Ganga from north to south. We put a trench right across the mound, that is from the western side to the eastern side. In our excavation, we found the painted greyware, the typical pottery of that period, on the western side. But on the eastern side, it was missing. And this was a great cause of worry to me. So, night after night, I didn't have sleep because this problem I couldn't answer. Then it occurred to me, could it be that the river Ganga cut away this part of the mound? And at midnight, I went to the site, took petromix and a few diggers and tried to explore the area to find out from where the cutting would have taken place. I could roughly spot out the line. Then for about a week I excavated the area and found actually the erosion line from where the mound was cut. And not only that, I found at the toe of the mound deposits of siltal sand which the receding river had left. And still further, when I did boring in the riverbed, some 50 feet below that surface, I found the pottery associated with the painted greyware. So this very clearly established that the river Ganga had cut away a major part of Hastinapur. Then I tried to look for literary evidence. And again, to my surprise, I found that the Matsya Purana and Vayu Purana actually refer to this flood. They give the names of the rulers after Parikshit. Parikshit came to the throne after the Mahabharata war. And they give the names of the rulers, so and so, so and so and so. The text says, fifth in generation from Parikshit was a king called Nichakshu. And the text states like this: Gangaya aparate tasmin nagare nagas ave tyaktva nichakshu nagaram kaushamyam sarnivatsati. Translated into English, it means that during the time of the Nichakshu king, there was a great flood in the Ganga which washed away the site of Hastinapur, and the capital was shifted to Kaushambi. So the literary evidence completely supported the archaeological evidence of the flood. Then comes the next question, Kaushambyamsa Nivatsati, that he will shift his capital to Kaushambi. Is there any evidence to support that? Yes, archaeological evidence is there. You see, from the lowest levels of Kaushambi, we find the same kind of degenerated painted graver which had begun to appear at Hastinapur when the flood took place. So there was a great tie-up between the end of Hastinapur and the beginning of Kaushambi. So all these pieces of evidence, both archaeological and literary, completely establish that the Mahabharata had a basis of history.
While Purana Killa, built by Humayun and later fortified by Sher Shah Suri, stands on the site today, the pattern of hillock and discovery of painted gravure were matched to that of findings from Hastinapur, says Professor B.B. Lal.
Well, this excavation at Hastinapur was done around 1950. After that, I was posted in Delhi Circle, and I wanted to know, I was inquisitive, whether the site which is known now as Purana Killa was Indraprastha of old. So I did some excavation at this site. And below these Mughal monuments, we find something like 10 meters of deposit, taking you back through Rajput period, through Gupta period, through Kushan period, Shunga period, Mauryan period, and much earlier than that. And in the lowest levels, we also find painted graver pieces. So which makes it clear, the painted graver gives a very good clue that it was during that period that it was occupied. Now whether it was Indraprastha, then it was called Indraprastha or not, is of course we would know what was it called. But there is very great evidence that yes, it was Indraprastha. First of all, you have seen the Purana Killa, around which there is a fortification wall put up by Sher Shah and Humayun. It goes around an ancient mound along the periphery of it. That's why it is irregular on plan. It neither makes a rectangle nor a square, nothing goes by. It was around the periphery.
Besides working on archaeological sites, Professor Lal's sea of work also brings into focus the development of Sanskrit from its early origins to language prominently spoken and written by Indo-Aryans.
The Vedic Sanskrit is quite different from the classical Sanskrit. See, from the Vedic Sanskrit, you pass on to in Brahmanas. Then in each you will find some slight difference. Then come the Upanishads. The language of the Upanishads is different from the language of the Rig Veda. And after that again it changed. And what we call the classical Sanskrit, that was what we have in the Ramayana and the Mahabharata.
Spending more than 7 decades in digging ancient sites of historical and cultural significance, the eminent archaeologist and historian expresses concerns over some of the neglect that has overlooked the ancient Indian sites. These sites not just throws light upon a culture, language and rites and rituals, but also in larger interaction of ancient India with its contemporary world.
Insofar the standing medieval monuments are concerned, for example, Humayun's tomb or Qutub Minar, a lot is being done to preserve them, to showcase them, but hardly anything has been done to preserve and conserve ancient excavated sites.